Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. I'm so grateful to be here today and share some time with Dr. Kyle Washut. Dr. Washut serves as the president for Wyoming Catholic College in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He is a Wyoming native and has been with Wyoming College since the inception, a graduate of Thomas Aquinas College in 2007. He returned to Wyoming Catholic as the inaugural Dean of Student Life, where he held that position until departing in 2009 to pursue a graduate degree in sacred theology from Austria's International Theological Institute, and while in Austria, continued to work for the college before returning full-time in 2012. Dr. Washut has taught across the college's curriculum since his return, everything from theology to philosophy, as well as her distinctive trivium and humanities courses, and in the fall of 2019 was named academic dean, serving in that capacity for 4 years before being named president in August of 2023. So I don't know if to call you president or doctor or Kyle, but whoever you want to be called. Kyle, thanks so much for sharing some time with us.
Happy to be here, Zach. Thank you so much.
Yeah. You'll have to help me with the custom. I've never spent time in Wyoming, so I don't know all of the culturally appropriate ways to address the president of a college from Wyoming. So,
Kyle works fine, Zach.
oh,
Kyle's great.
all
So
right, we'll go with Kyle. I have to tell you, we'll get into the college in a second because I almost wanted to get on a plane and fly up and vet the college because everything I was reading, I was like, this place is too good to be true. Like the perspective on wonder, a great books program, the 2 books of nature and scripture. I was like, there's no way that there's something this good in the world, but there it is in Wyoming. So before we go there, I list off those milestones: 2007, 2009, 2012, 2019, and now 2023, serving as the president of this college that you have been a participant in since the inception. When you look back just quickly over that story, is there one of those seasons that just makes you smile? You just go, that time in Austria, I love that. That was one of those sweet moments. What would you say is one of those sweet seasons in that stretch? Because you've been kind of running a marathon to get to the place you're
sure.
at.
I'll say there's distinctive, wonderful things about each of the seasons. You know, the initial grunt work and joy of starting the college, but really the sweet spot, if I had to say, were those precious years where I was just able to be in the classroom, going out on outdoor trips with the students, canoeing with them, hiking with them, and then being able to read great books together, memorize poems together, and have that conversation. That's the heart of what we do at the college. And those were just a really precious number of years between 2012 and 2019 where I could just soak that up and just do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine I've got a friend who runs a great books program out on the West Coast. And we were talking during COVID, I think, about all the disruption and people were trying to think about, well, how are we going to do education? Is education going to move more and more online? And he was saying there's something like irreducible to the way we learn. And he said, I feel like it needs to be small, it needs to be embodied, it needs to involve the great books. Obviously, that's his lane. And so I feel like that's the same spirit at Wyoming Catholic. I want to give you a chance. We talk a lot about uncovering enchanted reality, and we'll steer the conversation that way because I want to hear your voice on that. But before we do, just give us a sense of Wyoming Catholic and what it was that led you all to endeavor to open a new college to take this on.
So the college was founded by the Catholic Bishop of Wyoming, Bishop David Ricken, a pastor in Wyoming, Father Bob Cook, and a college professor at the community college, Dr. Robert Carlson. And all 3 of them became convinced that increasingly what we were exposing young people to was a dehumanizing form of education, an almost an alienating form of education. It was increasingly focused on how to be productive, how to get the best salary, how to streamline your certificates. It was not concerned with truth. It was not concerned with human connection. And this was back before the smartphone had really come to dominate the cultural landscape. But they were already feeling we weren't rooted in nature. We were, living in hermetically sealed, air-conditioned bubbles and various things. So they wanted to start a college that would renew the youth of America, give them a chance to reconnect with the world. And they did that by choosing a very small town in Wyoming. Lander, Wyoming's nestled in the foothills of the Wind River Mountains. It is difficult to get there. It's this remote mountain town. And so already there's a kind of remoteness that happens there. But then that wasn't enough. We then sent the freshmen out. Every freshman class goes out for 3 weeks of backpacking in those mountains. They come back to Lander. We have an integrated Great Books education. They do a week of winter camping at the base of the Tetons. They spend 6 more weeks out there doing whitewater rafting, hiking, stargazing, you name it, and a semester of horsemanship. While they're there in this intensive wilderness retreat, they give up their smartphones. They turn all their phones in. We have no Wi-Fi in the dorms, and they're just focusing on very intensive human connection. While they memorize poems, they learn to write, and they're reading those great books and having great conversations about them. And all of that, I think we'd say, is twofold motivated. On the one hand, the conviction that the thing we were doing for the youth of America is broken. We need to do something new for them. And the second, that humanizing education, that rootedness in reality and real community is what the world is missing and what we want to offer.
Yeah. I think back to Abolition of Man and Lewis's concerns looking ahead to our moment. And that conversation was about education and his concern deeply, like a heartfelt, really angst filled grieving towards what was happening in education and saying, listen, if we pursue this subjectivism, if we keep going down this route, we will literally lead to the abolition of man. You will not understand what it is to be human. And that was a deep concern. We're moving way back to the early 1900s when those conversations are taking place and that writing is happening. And here we are today. Apple Vision Pro drops tomorrow. And we're right on this threshold. And literally the conversations and some of the anxiety we feel talking to young people is they really are asking a real question of what does it mean to be human? And not what is the purpose of my life, like all of us who maybe grew up nested within hey, the purpose is to worship and glorify God and enjoy him forever. These things that we all kind of had in the air, those are erased. That horizon is wiped. And now young people are going, we feel like we have to come up with a definition for what it is to be human. I read an article that you had been quoted in saying that that's sort of what you're after. You want to recalibrate and what it is to be human. Say more about what you mean by that.
So one of the things that I think is striking about our society is that we're all willing to say that it's worth spending lots of years of study and training to learn to do very technical tasks, whether that's to be an engineer or a medical doctor or a lawyer. And by all means, that there's some great, wonderful specialized training that's involved in that. But we all seemingly think that being a good human being is something that you pick up on the side without clear intentional focus. That the thing you spend money and effort on is your job, and then this flourishing human life you'll just pick up. Now, clearly, the evidence from society is you don't just pick it up. Broken relationships, lost souls, deeply hurting people let us know that it's really hard to be a flourishing human being. And so we've lost sight of that. And in fact, we just lie to ourselves and say, well, as long as I'm making money or as long as I'm successful or as long as I'm famous, we're fine. I don't have to answer that question. And so what we're trying to do at Wyoming Catholic College is say, no, fundamentally, we want to ask, what's it mean to be human? What's it mean to be an embodied person meant for a relationship, meant to be rooted in this world, meant to be pursuing God? And those are really big questions. And we want to carve out space, 4 years at that cusp of entering into the adult world where young people are free to step back from all of the pressures of earning and social media image and the rest, and just ask that question and find out what really does their heart long for and how do they calibrate to a pace of life that's not just intended to make money off them, but is really looking at their human flourishing.
Yeah, for sure. I am thinking as you're talking back to Joseph Pieper's leisure is the basis of culture and being open and receptive and trying to make a break from a total work culture and to enter into something else. You all are saying, come be on horseback. We're going to do backpacking. We're going to do these things to be embodied and to put ourselves in a position to recover what it is to be human and what it means to learn. I am drawn to that. Obviously, in our work, we're all saying yes, and that's why we're having the conversation going, here's an example of a great place that's doing this. But I say that with a 17-year-old and in a culture where the conversation that is still in the air is you better get a tutor, an SAT tutor, you better get in AP classes, do everything that you can to get into a great institution, especially here in the Southeast. We're in Tampa. And so the pressure to get into UF or FSU or Georgia, the pressure is just, that's what it means to be successful. And you're just going to dive headlong into it. That's still the narrative. And yet then in more of our communities, we're seeing young people come back to us having dove headlong into those pursuits only to become lonely and really come out questioning what they were doing there or why they went. Are you seeing data already that says, hey, we can point to some graduates, we can point to some people who have come into this and they don't come out just having a refreshing camping experience for 4 years, but they're well-formed morally. Their intellectual capacity, their capacity for thinking and critical thinking and the ability to step into the workplace is not harmed or hindered. It's actually enhanced. Do you have some evidence that you point to and say, look, our approach is actually producing a different portrait of a graduate?
Yes. So there's several things we can note. So we note for Gen Z in general, they did a recent survey of managers who have hired a number of Gen Z employees in the last few years. And what are they noting? And one of the things that the managers are consistently complaining about is the lack of the Gen Z soft skills that actually make flourishing in a workplace a real important step. Things like communication, negotiation, conflict resolution, uh, basic ways of doing networking or relating and building on relationships. They just don't have those skills. And so they come in, and managers are frustrated. They come in with sort of high expectations for the salary or the work-life balance that they dream about, which is good. It's a good thing to want a work-life balance. But they're not able to enter into a conversation or receive constructive criticism about how to best achieve that because they've been in some ways really sheltered from human interactions and human networking. And so this is managers are saying, I don't know what to do with this. And then as a result, Gen Z gets this reputation for not being hard workers or not being willing to invest themselves or not being trainable. But really it comes down to this brokenness about how they communicate, how they can relate in the workplace. So our students are coming out exceptional communicators. That's obviously the education itself seems to me that it would set them up for that. They're doing conversation style classes. They're in really intense small leadership situations in the backcountry, responding to real things with real consequences, really working on those kind of skills. But the response we're getting from employers is that's not just a theoretical thing. They're loving this. We have about 40 of our graduates. We only have 380 graduates, very young school. We only have about 40 of them have already been accepted into a range of graduate programs, medical, lawyer, further studies in theology, humanities, literature. And for a very small college with that kind of a rate for grad school, that's already pretty attractive. We have a number of students that have gone in and quickly been promoted. We have a student who was hired by Halliburton just to be a tough working out on the oil derricks. And they were so impressed at his leadership skills and his communication ability. They said, look, we can teach you to be an engineer. We can't teach that kind of leadership, that kind of relationship to people. So they put him in an accelerated program to teach him engineering so that he could then go out and lead and work with the men who are actually out in the field, as opposed to someone who had just studied engineering in a kind of specialized way. We have a huge number of our students, about half of them end up going into teaching because of their desire to change what education is, their desire to connect with young people and recalibrate. So at this point, there are thousands of students every year being formed by Wyoming Catholic College students to recalibrate, to rethink about what's important in their life. And our students report, and when we do our alumni surveys, the average Gen Z student in 2023, the average Gen Z spent 7 hours of recreational time on a screen a day. 50 hours a week of just recreational time. That's not counting their emails. That's not counting their reporting or whatever they need to do. This is just their recreational time. And principally that's TikTok, Instagram, and messaging. Our students, our alumni are reporting on average spending between 1 to 2 hours every couple of days on their screen for recreational interest. On the one hand, I think, wow, 1 to 2 hours a day, that's still a lot. But compared to the national averages, substantially less. And what they're doing when they fill that time is they're having conversations with their families, they're reading stories, they're going out hiking. So not only are we seeing students that have the soft skills that make them better successful in the workplace, we're also seeing our students that in fact have that kind of work-life balance and the kind of thing that is so desperately on the hearts and desires of Gen Z.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you are specifically focusing on teachers and inspiring people to go teach and to approach education in a different way. That's inspiring too for what's coming. What is talk about horseback and the integration of that? Because I heard you say something just about the natural environment, and I grew up with a dad who loved horses, and just I love horses are great animals, and the interaction. There's so much benefit there. What does it do? Why is that important to the curriculum and the formation, the process? What are they learning by incorporating that in the program?
So one of the problems I think we have in our modern disenchanted age when we talk about relating to the natural world is that we very often are disposed to relate to the world roughly the way that in C.S. Lewis's book, The Magician's Nephew, uh, Uncle Andrew comes into Narnia and experiences it. So for those who haven't read the story, Uncle Andrew's this cynical magician scientist person who ends up going to Narnia at the moment it's being created by Aslan. And it's this glorious, beautiful moment where Aslan brings the world into existence through song, and these wonderful beasts and animals are coming up, and it's this incredible, and he's just, everyone else is just amazed at what's happening. And Andrew is sitting there thinking, wow, I bet we could generate this into a great mining operation. Or if I could bring enough miners in here, I can make tons and tons of money. That his immediate moment when he's out there in the world is to think how he can exploit it for use. It's very much the Wordsworth poem. The world is too much with us late and
Mm,
soon.
mm,
Getting and spending, we lay waste our hours. Little
mm.
we see in nature that is ours, right? We think of nature as just this thing that we're going to consume. Or if we're not thinking of that in the sort of commercial way, we're thinking that nature's the thing that I go to have a kind of adrenaline experience. I'm going to go do an intense adventure sport and have this really great high, and I'm going to come back and tell people about it, take pictures on it, and put it on Instagram or something. So when we're wanting students to recalibrate to the way they relate to the natural world, we need to do something more than just put them in the natural world because we have all these inclinations to either relate like Uncle Andrew or adrenaline junkies. Horsemanship is a great model there
Mm.
because horsemanship makes you enter into an interactive dialogue with the world. You're with an animal that has its own desires, its own feelings, its own force. And to be a good horseman, you can't just say, go here or do this. You are in cooperation with the horse. You're really exercising a recognition that you are part of the animal world, and then you are in the animal world as a kind of leader to work with it and direct it. And that kind of model, that dialogical reading of nature, is really important. And so we find our students, when they enter into horsemanship like that, it helps them then better think about their relationship to the natural world and their own bodies in general. That it's a back and forth cooperative incarnational approach, not an exploitative approach.
Yeah. How beautiful. What a gift to have access to time and expertise and the access to a location that provides that. I think what it recovers, again, you can't reproduce that in a lab. Like you have to participate in a natural environment with an actual animal. And that's one of my concerns. I want to ask you, you don't, I'm putting you on the spot, but because of being on this cusp of provision dropping tomorrow, and I'm thinking about those students going into the wild and horsemanship, and I'm concerned that we're ignoring. Lewis, I think, said the most progressive thing you can do if you're about to fall off a cliff is turn around and go the other way. That's a rough summary, but that's how I feel. I feel like we keep hearing like, oh, social media. I think Zuckerberg stood up and apologized to families and said, hey, I'm really sorry for what you've gone through in a recent hearing. But it feels like we keep seeing more evidence and more data that keeps coming out and saying, hey, I don't know if we can make things, but should we make things? We can make cars that go 300 miles an hour, but none of us drive 300 miles an hour because it's not good for us. And I feel like we're at that point. I think NIH just quietly put away a study about radiation and technology. And there's just all these little signals around that maybe we're going too far. And yet at the same time, we're about to introduce this thing that a Valley investor actually is quoted as saying, he's not from a faith perspective. He just said, hey, I've looked at this thing and it's technologically amazing. I don't think we should make it. It's taking us too far. Push back on that. Like from your chair, I want you to like enter into a conversation, say, hey, relax, Zach. You're getting wound up about this. It's not a big deal. Help me think well about this, just as a dad, as a person, because I feel like we need more horses and less technology, but that makes you sound like just like a dinosaur, to use Lewis again.
Right. Yeah. That we sound a bit like Luddites or something, that we hate technology or something along those lines. Right. Yes. So the thing when we talk with the students about our technology fast, we tell them the important thing to remember with technology is it does two things. Even with the very basic technology of the first time a monkey decides to use a stick to reach into a termite hole to get more termites on the stick and then eat it. Okay, he's using some kind of a tool to advance his reach and do something he can't. But with that advancing of reach, there's also an effect that it has on the person using the instrument. All of a sudden, there's different sensations, a different way of learning how to handle the stick. All right, the stick's really basic and minor. But the reality is every piece of technology we have does both of those things. It increases our reach, and then it has another effect on the user. Now, generally, at the pace of development of human technology, we have been able to develop something that increases our reach and then calibrate to what that effect it has on the user. In the last 100 years, we've been exploding in terms of the pace at which we're doing things. In some ways, I feel like by the 1990s, we still had not completely calibrated to 24-hour cable television. And within 15 years, we decided to put that in our pocket. That the pace we're going of the reach does not give us as a society, as a culture, the ability to develop those habits that keep us rooted in our humanity, rooted in our connection. The analogy I use is very much the fall of Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve fell and they ruptured their relationship with God, ruptured their relationship with the world around them and with each other and their own bodies, their response immediately was a kind of technology, was to make fig leaves. But the fig leaves did three things. On the one hand, they hid the reality of the fall. They tried to make them blend into the background. They further isolated them from relationship, and they gave the impression that they were still in the garden. Oh, look, we're surrounded by the beautiful leaves, even though internally they were a mess. It hid the internal reality from them. The risk with technology always is that that's what we use it for, to hide the emptiness in us, to further rupture relationships, and to blend into the background. So what we want to do is we do want technology. We want technology that allows us to deepen our relationships, deepen our reach. But we need to do it in a way that is not obscuring those deep human needs and hiding them. And I feel like the pace of technology we're going with, that's what's happening, is we're like, oh, if there's a problem with relationship, we then create an app to fix the problem with relationship that the smartphone use of app has used. Or, where we're going to just double down. It's this, like you said, going over the cliff. Like, okay, well, we're going to go over the cliff more slowly. Like, no, just stop. Let's recalibrate. Let's figure out how we actually want to do these things. So that doesn't mean we're going to turn off the cell phones forever. Doesn't mean we're not ever going to have any technological advance, but it does mean that there's a human development, a human culture piece that we're just not even thinking about. And the only way we're going to have time to think about it is to take a break and fast a little bit
Yeah.
from the technology.
No, I love that. That's well said. Thank you for that. It's a great way. I love the use of recalibrate, because here we are dialoguing with all sorts of technology, recording, making
Right.
this available. It's beautiful. It's a good. And there is that opportunity to step back and say, there is going to be an impact. This is going to impact us. What are those impacts going to be? And are we ready for them? And that's just
Right.
good. Yeah. When you see young people today looking out, we just had the Surgeon General put out the global health, or their annual health report, and said that the most significant health crisis in America right now is loneliness. They said it's a loneliness epidemic. So we know that that's on everybody's mind generally. What do you see when you see, as you look out over 18 to 25-year-olds, people who are just trying to make their way in this moment? What are some of the top issues that you just say, hey, these people are hurting, they're carrying these weights, and we need to pay attention to them?
So loneliness is definitely high on the list. Anxiety and depression is high on the list. Recent studies say that Gen Z is the most anxious, depressed generation on record. They're more prone to neuroticism. They're more uh, prone to be self-centered, and they're less resilient than previous generations. And not just previous generations of, hey, we're all old and mature now, but when we compare Gen Z in the 18 to 25 slot to 18 and 25-year-olds in previous generations, some of the markers we use are letting us know these people are really suffering. And I think all of those things are tied up also with a messaging that Gen Z is getting, which is an apocalyptic kind of messaging. The world is a disaster. It's going to explode. It's going to be on fire. There's going to erupt in war. It's going to fall apart. They're getting constant apocalyptic messaging. At the same time, they're told, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're a victim.
Yeah.
So you're in a fundamentally monolithic, patriarchal, unjust world that's doomed to failure. And all you can do is suffer from it because you're a victim, you're fragile. That kind of messaging for a young person is a disaster.
Mm.
18 to 25, you want the message to be a hero. You want the message to be great. So if you're going to give apocalyptic messaging, tell them how they can save it, how they can respond. And we're not. And so then we're shocked when they're anxious and depressed and lonely and less resilient. So I think that is a real crisis that we're facing. We need to figure out a way to connect our young people to each other, to connect them to a sense of purpose and connect them to a call to heroism. And that's going to involve letting them fail at times.
Mm.
But I think it's going to be a necessary response to the kind of anxiety and depression that we're seeing plaguing Generation Z right now.
Yeah, it's so good. With that backdrop, if you could, and again, I'm putting you on the spot, if you could just say, hey, I'm going to write a prescription, the 3 things that everybody can do to kind of recover or recalibrate, to use that, go back to that word, 3 things that we should just call everybody like, hey, here's 3 things that you can do to start making a little bit of a recalibration. I don't know, how many students do you accept at Wyoming Catholic?
So we have around 200 students a year, just all total, very
Okay.
deliberately small. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, there's more than 200 of us we
Right.
can't all crash your program and go on horseback.
Right.
I wish we could. So for everybody, you're in Seattle, you're in San Diego, you're in Austin, you're listening to this conversation, you go, I feel some of the things you're talking about, and I love the dream of going to Wyoming Catholic. I'll share that with friends who have kids who are going, but I'm already past that. How can
Right.
I recalibrate? What would you say are some top 3 things that you would encourage us to
Yeah.
do?
So wilderness renewal seems to be built on a number of things that I think are easily adoptable for folks. One, I suggest to people that they choose a smartphone Sabbath. Take it as Sunday, a day where you just turn off the screen. I, Obviously, if you're in the world, we've got work, we've got responsibilities, etc. Maybe Sunday doesn't work for your schedule, but find a day that you're going to be off screen. And then when you're off screen, make intentional community.
Mm.
A small group, whether that's, just your family, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a couple of folks from church, whatever that is, some kind of intentional community. and then go do an activity that doesn't involve the screen. Certainly, I think the outdoor activity is great. A little hike in a park, looking at stars, anything like that is great. But any kind of intentional activity that's off screen is going to be a rejuvenating, wonderful human experience. And then I think a really easy way of the kind of importance of study and the re-enchantment, you want to learn to think differently about the situation you're in. C.S. Lewis says it's really good to read old books just to remind us there's other ways of thinking about things.
Mm.
I chose a small poem, a simple poem, not that's super esoteric. And, people say poems sometimes and we think, oh gosh. No, find a poem that's fun, it has a nice rhyme, that you like it, and just recite it together in your group and then talk about it. Or get a short story and read it and talk about it. We're talking 20 minutes, 30 minutes, not an intensive amount of time. But take a screen fast, intentional community, some kind of activity, and then a space of some kind of study, a short story or a poem that's not, you're choosing not because it's good for you, but just because it's fun, it's delightful, it's great to share with this group. I think that those are all three fundamental steps to helping recalibrate this culture.
Yeah, I love that. Dana Joy, we had him on the show, and he has a little tiny book called Poetry is Enchantment. And so I love that you nudged towards poetry. And you quoted the Wordsworth poem. That's a beautiful poem to go back to. Is poetry a part of the program as well?
Yeah, so all of our students memorize roughly 40 poems, and it's the same body of poems. And so you walk into a classroom and you start reciting the first line, and they recite it together, which is amazing. The communal experience of poetry, that's part of our heritage. That's what humans did. There were songs, there were poems that we'd get together and we'd recite them. And so our students know the Wordsworth poem. Our students know Ozymandias. Our students know God's Grandeur from Hopkins. And what's important is they know them together. And so there's this delight in reciting and thinking about, and it pounds with your heart, again, this incarnational bodily kind of way of experiencing it. And it's just delightful. And the more that we can get those kind of memories, the more that we can build up that cultural practice, I think the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, hey, this has been so good. I just love the opportunity to celebrate what you're doing. I want you to know, I hope it's encouraging that we found our way to your work, and all the way down here in Tampa and the work we're doing. We were so encouraged to see that Wyoming Catholic exists, and we'll be cheering you on, throwing people your direction, pointing people to it. So keep up the good work. I'm really encouraged by what you're doing, and I hope it's encouraging that people are becoming more and more aware of it. I think your intuition, all the hard work and investment is right. It's going to take smaller, deliberately small communities to offer something new. And you're on the threshold. You're really early in this, that as we're making these choices between the old narrative of what higher ed needs to look like and what actually is impactful and shapes good humans, I think you're early. So don't grow weary. It's awesome what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Zach. That's terrific. And, if you or your listeners ever want to come out and visit Wyoming, we do guided backpacking trips. We'll do family retreats during the summer. Come out. A great way to start recalibrating is at least take a week of a wilderness retreat out in the wilds of Wyoming. We'd love to have people.
You may have solved something. We keep talking about doing an on wild experience. We do an on beauty experience where we take some folks up on a guided trip through museums. I would love to see an on wild experience where we get to recalibrate. So I'll follow up with you on that. But
great. Love it.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Zach.
Hey, thanks so much for your time. Keep up the good work.